people don't want data. They resonate with the stories.
Absolutely.
They resonate with the personal connection. And I think that really brings it back into the personal brand is, you are your brand. No one's ever lived like you. No one will ever live like you. No one will ever have the same experiences you. Not similar, but not exactly the same. And how you interpret them are all very different.
Hey, my name is Lisa Hugo, and I'm obsessed with helping other people find and develop their voices so they can go out and take on the world, be seen as an authority, expert, and speak their truth with utmost confidence because they know that what they have to share will connect with their audience and make a difference. I studied performing arts and spent 20 years of my career traveling the world as a professional singer-songwriter. I teach you the secrets to speak up and be heard, overcome your fears, to build your speaking skills, and learn how you can use your skills to make a change both in your own life and the lives of others. This is your one-stop shop for all things confident speaking. This is Impact Through Voice. Well, welcome back to another episode of Impact Through Voice. I'm your host, Lisa Hugo, and today I've got a very special guest with me. She's no stranger to the stage. She's no stranger to speaking on podcasts and in public. She's a business mentor. She's a brand strategist. She's a stylist. Please welcome to the podcast, Kelly Lundberg.
Thank you so much for that fabulous introduction. I feel like we need a round of applause.
Exactly. Wonderful to have you on the show. You've been on my radar for quite some time. I think I got to know about you about 5 years ago. We have a mutual friend, Lucy Bradley. Is she still Lucy Bradley?
Yes.
And she was working on my brand strategy at the time and redesigning my logo.
Yep.
And I'm pretty sure she would have given me a link to your website to go and have a look and be inspired. And this is a perfect indication of a great brand. So that's how I first got to know you.
I love that. I always love stories about how people connect. And I often think here in the Middle East, especially, or in the UAE, that, you're only one degree away from knowing someone else. But I always love to know what was the initial connection that brought you there. So, and
since then, I guess I've been following you on social, but this is the first time we meet in person. So it's really lovely to be in the same room with you and to be able to have this conversation. I want to can you take us back to how it all started for you?
How far do we go back?
How far would you like to go back?
I guess coming to the Middle East, and I think when we talk about our voice, maybe even if it goes back to, if we're talking about impacting in voice, I suppose my career started at 18, 19 when I actually wanted to escape Scottish weather. I think anyone who's visited Scotland knows it's a beautiful city, but it's not renowned for its sunny days, put it that way. And I had this opportunity to be an overseas holiday representative. So I basically worked with British holidaymakers, and my role was to look after them, host welcome meetings, tell them about the island, book excursions for them. And I share that because that I ended up doing, which was supposed to be for one season, ended up being for 4 years. And that gave me so much, I think, confidence, because I was thrown at 18 years old and said, well, you've got to go and speak to 60 people. I'm like, hang on a minute, I haven't spoken to 60 people before. You've got to tell them about the island of Cyprus. I'm like, hang on a minute, I've only been here 3 days. What am I supposed to say? And I think so the reason I share that is I was thrown in quite early on to having to be quite resourceful. Even though I was employed by someone else, and I did that for 4 years, and then decided, you know what, I'm leaving. Life as a holiday rep, went back home. The Scottish weather is still the Scottish weather, so I lasted another few months, and then ended up out in Dubai with Emirates Airlines as cabin crew. So that was then the next sort of part of my career, where I did that for a couple of years. But that was exciting times in Dubai. It was early 2000.
So I was going to ask, when was that? How far back is that?
Oh, early 2000. So a long time ago. And it was just opportunities after opportunities. And there was just this buzz in the city. And whether that was buying and selling property, whether that was starting your business, it had this attitude of can-do-ness, anything was possible. And I found that hugely contagious. And I was like, okay. And at 24, I decided I'm going to launch my own business. So that was the the first foray into entrepreneurship, was incredibly naive, had no idea what to expect. So I thought, how hard can it be to equal the salary that Emirates Airline pay me? And I worked out quite hard because it doesn't happen overnight.
So how was it back then setting up a business? Because, I mean, I've been through it several times actually since I first started my journey with a free zone first and then onto the mainland.
Yeah.
But back then, I can imagine it would have been even more difficult than it is now.
Oh, no one knew what category to put someone who was offering what was then a personal shopping and styling agency. And they're like, well, what do we call that? You know,
what's your activity?
Yeah. So they actually put me under gifts and novelties because they couldn't.
How bizarre!
Yeah, because they couldn't work out where to sort of put me. And I think, you know, around that time as well, you needed to have 100,000 dirhams in your bank account in order to get your 100% shareholder. It was just like all these things that you needed to tick.
So were you in a free zone to get 100%
yeah, I
share?
was.
Right.
And the whole piece around that was like 24 years old. Like I didn't have 100,000 dirhams. So I remember kind of at the time I was a little bit creative and I actually took a loan from the bank. And when they asked me, you know, what kind of loan was it that I wanted, I was like, well, it's a car loan and I'm buying a car. And the bank manager was like, oh, you know, I was sitting opposite him. I think now you can do this online, but in those days. And I was like, what kind of car? And I remember panicking and I said, I'm buying a Porsche. And he was like, you've got great taste. And 3 days later, the funds were in the bank account.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that loan was all paid off within the next couple of years. But something quite interesting about that was that obviously gave me the funds to start my business. But actually it gave me a huge amount of accountability. And it's something that I've seen as I've gone on to mentor many people in business, that when you've got that real hunger and drive, like I knew before I did anything, I had to pay. I think it was something like 3,127 dirhams because I was scared I'd go to jail. You know,
every month.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that was my driving force of going, no, you've got to pay this loan back.
So business has to work.
Absolutely. And you then end up pushing yourself in ways when, if you are maybe more comfortable that you're like, oh, it's okay, you know, I've got a loan to pay that back or whatever, then it doesn't push you in the same way. So I think that really propelled me in my career and everything I did in the entrepreneurship space. So had that styling business for 15 years and then sold that and then sort of operated under my own personal brand for a couple of years while I really got clarity on what were the next steps. And for me, that was into the personal branding space, which style is a huge part of. But the more I styled, the more I realized there's so much more to how you show up than what you wear.
Yeah, so true. You had a TEDx opportunity.
Yeah.
When was that? And tell me about how did that come about?
Yeah, so it was in 2016. But I would even say 2 years before that, I wanted to do a TEDx talk. And I had no idea how the opportunity was going to come. But I always believe that you need to be prepared and ready for when that opportunity comes. So I remember when I made that as a goal, I think I put it on my vision board. It was in my desire statement. And the first thing I did was went and bought Talk Like TED by Carmen Gallo, I think it is. Yeah. And that gave me a huge insight into, what it would be like to do a TED Talk, TEDx talk. And I think the big thing about telling people your goals is that opens doors. And it was a friend of a friend who contacted me and said, we do a TEDx Jess. The theme was time, the year she was doing it. And we wondered if you'd be interested in coming along to talk about something maybe related to your career or the time in fashion and how it's evolved. And I was like, I'm up for doing a TEDx talk, but it's not going to be on fashion. I want it to be something that's super personal and is going to have a big impact.
So what did you talk about?
So time, the title of it was The Currency of Time. Now about maybe 6 months before that conversation, I had just finished a book called Life in Half a Second by Matthew. The surname escapes. The book changed so much for me in the space of going, how quickly life passes us by and what are the things that we actually want to achieve. And I set all these goals out and started to tick them off my list. And it was all about the time we have with people. How much time do we have left? and what do we want to do with the time that we have left? So it then became very personal. And my granny had passed away not long before that. So it had brought back into, whether that's, you calling someone that you haven't spoken to for a while, or someone when you just think of them, you never know when you're going to have time or that not have that time again. So yeah, it was personal. It left, because the whole point of a TEDx or a TED is ideas worth sharing, but it's something I wanted to leave was an impact and to call the audience to do something.
Yeah.
I loved it. It actually cured my stage nervousness of notes. So I was very attached to any presentation I did. I always had notes.
You had, notes.
Yeah,
Notes.
my Scottish accent. And obviously with a TEDx talk, it's 18 minutes and no notes.
Yes.
And
they're very particular about the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think mine was 16.
Countdown timer there.
I think I was 16 minutes and 20 seconds or something like that. But I had rehearsed.
Yeah, That's what I want to know. How did you prep yourself for that moment?
So I had been asked to maybe be part of it, I think in the November or the December, and the TEDx was April. Mm-hmm. So I had a good 5 months, but I had read in Talk Like TED that you needed to, not that you needed to, but many of them practiced 100, 200 times reading it through. So I knew that my presentation had to be finished by February in order for me to spend 2 months on my presentation, but my talk by the end of February. So then I could spend March practicing it. And I just every morning during March, I did a run through in the morning, I did a run through in the evening, and I maybe do one at lunch. If anyone came to my house, I'd be like, can you listen to my presentation? Can you listen to my TEDx? So all my friends and family that came to it had all heard it a million times. But I do it so differently now that I think I really tried to rehearse and memorize every word by word. And I think now I'd be so much more confident to tell the story, not having memorized word for word. So it would come across not like I'm remembering it, it's coming across authentically.
So that comes with experience and with time and practice and the opportunities that you have to be able to learn. You have a certain amount of stories, and these stories you can, as we're experiencing today, you can just throw them in at the drop of a hat, and they're so a part of you that you won't tell it the same way every time, but that story is part of you and your journey and your connection to what you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best part about, presenting nowadays is that people don't want data. They resonate with the stories.
Absolutely.
They resonate with the personal connection. And I think that really brings it back into the personal brand is, you are your brand. No one's ever lived like you. No one will ever live like you. No one will ever have the same experiences you. Not similar, but not exactly the same. And how you interpret them are all very different. And that
was something I wanted to ask you is, do you feel that everybody has a personal brand
100%.
Or should have a personal brand?
100%. Everyone has a personal brand. They just don't think they have a personal brand.
So how do you help people to come to that realization, and, to what level do people need a personal brand? Because a lot of the people that I work with who are in corporate or executives, they would argue, yes, but, I'm part of another company, that their brand, but how important is my brand?
It's a great question, because it's the one question I ask at the start of any keynote is I'll say, who here has a personal brand? And it's quite interesting because I get some people who are quite clear and going, yes, I've got some. Some people go, no, I don't. And then I get, sort of. I have a sort of brand. And I always smile at that because I'm like, well, you are you. It's just the difference is that you're not actively working on your personal brand. So your personal brand is the amalgamation of your on and offline persona and how it's perceived by others. So regardless of what industry you're in, working or not, if you're not working, you've got a personal brand, and the school gates and how other mums and dads perceive who you are and how you show up and what you do for your kids and for other kids. That's part of a personal brand. As is when you're in the executive space, you're the ambassador for the company that you're working for. And more organizations now are investing in their employees because they understand that things like on LinkedIn, it's the employees' posts about the brand that get more views than the business itself posting about what it is or whatever it is that they're doing. So I think there's definitely for 2024, I was actually writing down some ideas on, trends for the year. And it's going to be into the executive space where people are really going to identify, no, I can't hide behind the organization. The world has become so much more competitive. Whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an employee, you can now be based anywhere in the world, which means the pool is wider.
Yep.
There's more choice, more opportunities, which means you've got to be more competitive.
I've even noticed on LinkedIn that some senior level executives have changed their titles to become thought leaders. And so they're separating themselves from the company and creating their own personal brand in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a funny word, thought leader, because it's a word that I think you would describe someone else, but I wouldn't call myself a thought leader. What do you think about that?
If I'm thinking of you, I think in your space you are a thought leader.
But you would say I was a thought leader, but I wouldn't say
represent yourself as that.
Yes, which I think is an interesting word. If other people are starting to describe themselves like, I'm a thought leader.
Yeah,
I don't know. I find that quite interesting in the description of who you are.
I hadn't actually thought about it, but now that you bring it up, it is a bit. Would it be egocentric?
Well, that's what I wonder.
Yes.
I'm a thought leader.
Yes. Rather than to be considered by others as a thought leader in the industry.
They're an expert in their industry.
Yes, exactly.
Food for thought.
How important or how much connection do you have in the personal branding space to the voice?
Huge. Like it really is huge. And I never really understood the importance. But when they say it's not until you look back that you can join the dots. And that's when I look back and I go, wow, that the public speaking from the holiday rep to speaking on the airlines to then kind of being thrown into it in entrepreneurship. That is one of the fastest ways for people to understand what it is you do. Speak one to many rather than one to one. And there's that credibility factor when you're on the stage and speaking. But it's fascinating that it scares so many people, the speaking publicly and utilizing their voice, which is so powerful. So I think that they're really closely aligned, but people don't understand that it's actually a skill and it's learnable.
That's so true. Yeah.
And that's one thing that, as a brand strategist, I can give an overview. I can give, it's in all my 7 pillars that I talk about, style I can go all into, but the rest are overviews. And then I say to clients, like, if this is one thing that you're really not comfortable with, then you go all in and get an expert for that. Once they've got their overall strategy and going, right, this is what I want to do. I'm going here, I'm going going to start this. Okay, now I want to get better at this. Okay, who do you need to get in to help you? But it's huge.
Yes. And it's not just the fear of showing up, putting yourself out there, but there's also the element to how you sound. Because so many of the people that I'm working with, it covers everything from the monotonous voice, which is really straight and very boring, and people can't shift between different notes and have more variety or more energy in their voices.
Yeah.
And then you've got here in this region, I was talking about that earlier with you, that crackly voice that drops off at the ends of phrases. Yanni. We hear that so much here. And it's, again, that lack of energy or those descending melodies that make us sound sad or not energized or interesting. Yeah. And so there are so many different characteristics that when I'm working with somebody, then we're really diving into what is it in your voice that you don't like? Because many people don't like the sound of their voice. Is it something that you're perceiving for yourself? Or is it really something which other people are going to be put off by as well? And if it is, then let's change it. We can change it. We learn to speak by mimicking and imitating through our whole life. So somebody like you, I think you're a very eloquent, very well-spoken person.
Thank you.
That you must have had great mentors growing up and great influences that helped you to be out there and use your voice.
Practice, I think, and feedback, actually. I didn't realize, interestingly, in voice, I had I have a speaking voice and I had a presenter voice. And I never realized this for years until someone pointed it out to me. And they're like, why don't you just talk how you would talk to me when you're on video? And I was like, but I do. And they're like, no, you don't. You've got this weird presenter voice. And then I went back and I looked at some of the videos and I was like, yeah, I do actually. And I think feedback is a really interesting point, because I think there's a time and a place for presenter and newsreader kind of voice and what it is that you're doing, of course. But in the space now of social media and communication and educating and sharing value, it's very much how we're talking now is how it should be in the social space.
Yes.
So I think that was a real valuable piece of feedback 5 or 6, 7, maybe 7 years ago, understanding the difference between that.
Not just in the social space, but also, let's say you're speaking from stage at an event.
Yeah.
You don't want to be speaking at people. You want every person in that audience to feel like they're connected with you and they're having a one-on-one conversation with you. Yeah. And that's what really works, because that's what makes people feel connected to you and that they have that trust and that believability to maybe move to that next step.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we were talking about Bim Singh, and I was saying earlier that I had did this course recently, a Stage Academy, and someone had said to me, but you're a really good speaker. Why are you doing a public speaking course? And I was like, but there's always things we can learn. I'm by no means perfect. There's so much I can do to improve my communication. And I think when we stop learning in any of those fields, then we miss out. And I think that's a huge piece of, regardless of wherever you are on the journey, I'm always hungry to go, well, how can I be better? Or how could I communicate this? Or what would work? Because then I think it's knowledge that then you can pass on to other people.
So you were talking earlier about having your presenter voice and having your normal voice and how, people said to you, you speak so differently when you're on camera. And it's interesting because my kids are constantly telling me that all the time. Mom, you are not the same mum when suddenly that light turns on and you're on camera.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, I was on LinkedIn recently and I came across, I think it was something you'd shared, and there you were talking a little bit about your story to getting a speaker spot with Najahi.
Yes.
So I'd like to hear that story from you directly.
It's really interesting because 2016, I attended a Najahi event, which was under, I think they called it Success Resources at the time. And I remember sitting with my best friend and I kind of nudged her and I was like, do you know what? One day I'm going to be back on the stage here. I want to be on this stage. And 2016, I was coming to the end of my sort of celebrity styling. I'd been doing it for kind of 10, 12, 15 years. And I knew I was ready for the next thing. But standing on a stage talking about personal style to a mixed audience is not something that's going to create enough of an impact. So I knew that there needed to be a transition into what was I communicating? How was it going to impact people? So I wasn't ready right now, but I knew I was going to be back there. So that was 2016. And then, over the space of the next 5 years, my business, what I offer, everything that I had became now personal branding, the brand new formula, which I've created, the 7 pillars. So I had something really tangible to be able to communicate to an audience of men and women, whether they're employed or not. Of course, I have a niche of clients that I speak to, but on a whole, anyone can listen to what I talk about and still take one thing away from them, or one thing away from it. So I was interviewing on my podcast the founder of Najahi. And I had said to her, what are some of the things that you've got coming up? Yes, Afa, yeah. And she was telling me, we've got this big event coming up, blah, blah, blah. And she shared with me the collateral. And there was like a few filled in faces of speakers, all men. And there was like 3 gaps of like blank faces. And I'm like, who are the other 3? And she said, oh, well, we haven't got them decided. And I was like, well, do you have anyone in personal branding? And she was like, no. And I said, and do you have any females yet? And she was like, we're trying to shortlist another female too. And I was like, well, what about a female from the region that you're not flying in that could speak on that topic? And she was like, 110%. Send me over your presentation so it doesn't collide with anyone else's content. And we'll take it from there.
Amazing.
And that was it.
Amazing
And that's the whole thing. If you don't ask, you don't get. Like, and I say that to my clients. You know, where do you want to speak? What are the opportunities you want? You've got to create as many of them for you as possible, for people to see you, for people to then come and ask you. So I think there's a healthy mix of both.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Najahi story really got my attention as well, because I had a very similar story, but it was a bit later on. In 2020, I dragged my husband along. It was just before COVID hit, and I said, we're going to this event. There's Les Brown speaking. It looks really interesting. You're coming along. And he was reluctant. He didn't really want to come with me. And yeah, after that event, that was a transformational point for me to go there, to see these speakers from stage.
Yeah.
I said the same thing. I am still waiting for my opportunity.
It's coming.
But what I learned from that, and some of the mentors that I ended up then working with thereafter, were transformational in shifting the way that I work with my clients, the way that I've moved away from a one-to-one setting where every hour of your time is limited by how much you can charge for that hour and how many hours you have in a day, to then shift it across into this one-to-many, and also to be able to broaden your horizons and move out of your geographical location. But now we can go much further.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that story really resonated with me.
And it's so interesting. I always find that when you share content, you never know what actually resonates and lands with people as well. And I always like knowing if there's something that has made an impact. One of my goals is to inspire 5 people a day to make it, to take action. So we can inspire lots of people, but it sits with inspiration and it doesn't necessarily go anywhere. So I'm always like 5 people a day to take action. And posts that go out, you don't know whether they've inspired action or what they do. So I always love hearing these stories.
So true. Yeah. So encouraging people also to respond to you in your social. That's one. How do you do that? Get people to then respond? Because people see things, but not many people take that action to give you the feedback.
Yeah, that's true. I think being really clear and asking for it. Because I think a lot of people aren't clear enough in either their call to action at the end of a post or just generally asking for a recommendation, asking for feedback, asking for what's your thoughts, what's your opinion. One of my clients, Barbara, really used that call to action. Can you share this post? So to set the backstory is she'd lost her job. She was working with me and we were developing a personal brand strategy for her coaching business, and during the time she lost her day job, so to speak, and that was a real priority to fill that so that she could come back to work on her coaching space. And she wasn't getting anywhere, and I said, okay, we need to turn the tables and focus on a personal brand strategy for employment rather than the coaching business for now. So she was all on board. We created a video to accompany her personal branded website, which I had suggested that she go and purchase hirebarbara.com. So it was creating a story, a piece all around hiring her, making it visually appealing for employers to see what she was all about. So to go back to the how do you get people to do it, she made the really clear call to action at the end going, can you help me? Can you share this message? And I'd love to be able to turn this round to a success story. And the whole video post went viral. And she ended up, on the last count, she told me that it's had 4.6 million views on LinkedIn.
That's incredible.
She was offered kind of 60 job/opportunities, interviews, coffees, meetups that created the one thing that she'd been lacking, which was momentum. And out of that, ended up securing a job. So that kind of asking for help, asking for the feedback, asking for opinions, I think is something that we don't do enough.
That's so true. And that's such good advice. And what a great example of what happens when you do ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And actively work on your personal brand strategy. I think that's the whole thing. And that goes back to the question that you asked earlier was, do people have a personal brand? Everyone does. It's just all you're doing is not working actively on it. And that active, for some people's 3 hours a week. For other people, it might just be 1 hour a week. For some people, it might be 2 hours a day. So that active bit has just got to be consistent. That's it.
you've been running a podcast for a while, and you just mentioned that you had Alpha from Najahi on that podcast, and that was your opportunity. That was your springboard to then get that opportunity speaking at Najahi. So tell us a little bit about your podcast and how you use that in your branding and in your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's my second podcast. So I had my very first podcast in 2012, and I thought I was late to the game in 2012. And I did 50 episodes. It was called, I've forgotten what it was called, but I did 50 episodes of it, and I stopped doing it. It was a lot of effort, and at the time I wasn't getting what I wanted and what I needed and the opportunities from it, and I wasn't clear. I think that was the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. So I stopped that, and I think that's really important for anyone that's starting a podcast. Is it's great to interview people, it's great to speak to people, but there's got to be a clear outcome, or else you can get lost on the journey. So starting this new podcast now, in the last sort of 20, 25 episodes, there's been a real drive to keep it, about people, but within their personal brand. What have they done? Tips, because that's my, area of expertise. Yes. But the piece about podcasting that I say is brought opportunities, because I meet people, I learn much more about their business. I can refer them clients, or they can then refer me clients. So I think it's great from that perspective. I've been able to practice my skills of speaking. And years ago, I attended a 3-day conference in London. It was a speaking from stage conference. It wasn't necessarily how to speak, it was how to sell, package your product, all of that. And the speaker had said, if you want to practice your speaking, you need to be speaking publicly, however that is, at least 4 times a month. And I always had that in my head going, I need to be speaking 4 times a month. If I'm not speaking and being paid to speak, how else can I speak? And podcasting's great. In those days, there wasn't the social media opportunities that there is now, that also gives you to do an Instagram Live or a LinkedIn Live. But I'd say all of those experiences bring it back to just me being a better speaker and communicator. Using your voice is just being able to better communicate with people and provide more opportunities. One that has come to me again through podcasting is Sarah Brooke from the Sparkle Foundation. So someone had followed me, like yourself, for a number of years and said, you need to have Sarah on your podcast. She's brilliant. You love her story. And I was like, well, I'm open to anyone that's, saying you need to hear her story. When she came on my podcast, I was like, I love it. What can I do to help? How can I help? I'm 100% in. And that then has brought sort of the last 2 years, me supporting her and helping her and the children in Malawi, which is her organization, a not-for-profit organization that she has. And none of this would have happened if I didn't have a podcast. To bring people that out with business, things like that bring me so much joy.
Would you also say that I'm quite new to podcasting, so this is great getting your advice as well as we take ours forward. But by making these connections, I would not have met you if I hadn't invited you onto the podcast as well. Yeah, so absolutely. You're creating connections, meeting new people, and that can then, you don't know what can come out of that moving down the line, but that person will most likely always be available to you if you ever reach out and say, hey, can you help me with this? Because you've already had that sort of, intense discussion and connection by sitting down for 40 minutes to an hour.
It's something I really recommend, and it doesn't need to be to the scale that maybe we were at in a studio hiring it out. I mean, that has elevated the visibility of my podcast, I will say, because for the first 70 episodes, I did do online. And there's a great space for that. But when you've got the next level of going, no, I want to take it, to elevate it, being in a studio really does change the dynamics of that. But being able to connect with people, learn from them, and it's great content as well for social media.
Speaking of content, how do you continue to show up? Because I've seen your YouTube channel and you have so many videos. I think you're committed to posting 3 times a week. Is that still the case?
Yeah. YouTube, podcasting.
Yeah, podcasting. What other social channels are you present on? But how do you keep showing up and coming up with content and having the energy to put yourself out there?
It's a good question. I have to plan. I have to say that I'm not one who'll be like, oh, let me just record a piece of content and put it out there. I'm very good at doing stories. I'll tend to do them 4 or 5 times a day, and that's very easy. And I think that's how people can engage and get to know what goes on in my day and how it all works. But when it comes to creating content, I'll sit down and I have to plan it. So it's kind of a 2-part process where I'll sit down, create the content, come up with the ideas. It'll come from questions that people have asked me throughout the month on social media, things that I've maybe seen around. It's topical, and just being inquisitive. And then from there, it's so that's part 1, writing it all out, and then part 2 is then recording it. And I do a mix of recorded content, direct to camera. I'll do content that's B-roll and I just prep it and it's already done. But I have to say, laterally in the past 4 months, I have got a social media manager who does help with Instagram, because when I changed my account, I went to posting twice a day, and that's 10, 12, 14 posts a week. Mm-hmm. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big step forward. And I think a big step forward in understanding that even though it's your personal brand, you can get someone to support you on it. I was very much under the illusion that, no, it's my personal brand, I have to do all of it. But actually you don't. And the more people you want to reach, and the more people you want to inspire, and the more people you want to help, you can't do everything.
No, and as you grow in your business, then you have to have people who can support you.
Absolutely.
But it's still your personal brand, and nothing ever takes away from that.
And I'm still having to make the content. I'm still doing the piece to camera. I'm just not doing the let's upload it piece.
Right. So does that person also help you to come up with the ideas or the structure for the week, or that's still your baby?
Yeah, no, I come up with all the ideas.
Right.
They'll maybe give me a bit of a structure and go, what do you think about this, this and this? And I'll be like, yeah, no, this isn't quite right. Or I've got an event on this day, keep that clear because I'm going to have a piece of content for that. So there's still moving parts, and then other pieces of content that's pre-recorded will get shifted to the following week. So there's always things there, but then I'll always try and do something that's real time or in the moment or current, because then that's real and authentic. And then the rest of it is value adds. What can I share that I've learned or that other people will get knowledge from?
You mentioned earlier that you had also shifted into one-to-many. I think we were talking about this previously before we started the podcast today, but tell me a little bit about how that works for you now.
Yeah. So I've got one-to-many being stage, which is communicating on whether it's corporate groups, whether it's group masterclasses. So it could be anything from 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 50 would be probably where they want to get results in a workshop space. So that's one option. And then I also launch 3 times a year Brand You Accelerator, which is a 12-week program. It's group, and I take entrepreneurs who are fairly new on their journey of personal branding through 12 weeks of things that they should be considering, whether that's, speaking. We did an hour, one of our sessions was on that, branding, how they're showing up, social media content. So all the key aspects. And it's brought so much because they bring different questions and it's a different way of learning, but I love it as well. And it just gives me that leveraged opportunity as well.
Have you ever thought to have a pre-recorded course?
I have one as well.
Oh, you have one?
Yeah. I do have one of that. That was the very first start into podcasting, actually. So I include that in as a bonus into many of the programs. Okay. And I should go back to looking, just selling just that as a piece. It's one of the things that I'm there, but then I'm like, but it needs updated. It's 3 years old. I should redo it. So I think that's always been I love it and give it as a bonus. But if I was going to then sell it for $1,000, do I need to redo it? So that's maybe a question that I can look at in the new year.
Yeah, that's something for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
I heard you recently got engaged.
I did, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that story, because that's a lovely story.
Recently got engaged to Graham. Well, I say recently now, I'm like, it wasn't that long ago. And I'm like, no, it was quite a few months ago now. So we're
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're just in the process of planning the wedding now. So Graham and I actually knew knew each other from school. So I've known him since I was 12, 13 years old. And what is really special is I'd always had a sort of secret crush on him at school. And then at my high school prom at 17, we had a little kiss, but that was as far as it ever went. And I left. So I shared my journey, left at 18. And we reconnected through a dating app that my mum had put me on about 4 or 5 years ago, going, it's about time you meet someone. I'll help you on the dating app. And she uploaded all these pictures and did all the copy. And
that's so funny.
We had a really funny...
My mother would never do that.
We had a really funny afternoon. It was a Friday afternoon, and she had a bottle of rosé and just, having a swipe through. And I was like... Mom, I went to school with him. I kissed him at school prom. La, la, la. I was like, okay, we can swipe right or whatever the right way is. And and we connected and we went on a date. So this was all happening back in Scotland. I was just back for some time with family. And that then started the 4-year long distance relationship that we had between...
I didn't realize it was so long.
Yeah, Edinburgh and Dubai. COVID didn't help with that. So there was a huge part of, it just wasn't a right time to move jobs, move cities, move countries. So that that held us back a lot. But at the same time, it also gave us the opportunity to really develop our own characters of who we are on our own and what we like doing, and then coming together. And, we made it work. We had every Saturday, it's these rules, but we were very clear that communication was a big part of what we did. It had to be. And the minute one of us didn't feel okay for whatever reason, personally, bad day, something you said, something you didn't say, whatever it was, we had to be really quick at coming back and saying, I'm feeling like this, or this has made me feel like this. Oh, it was because of this, so we had really good communication. And every Saturday we had our longer date where we would disconnect from phones and we would spend 2.5 hours speaking every single week. So we did that for 4 years.
Wow. And
on one of the trips he proposed, and I always knew that we were going to be together. I always knew at some point he would move, but it was just, he'd move when the time was right for him, for us. And that happened this summer. So
yeah. Wow, awesome.
Yeah, so it's exciting.
Looking forward to the onward journey there.
Yeah, it's been interesting, the communication piece on the other side, because when you spend a lot of time together, you don't prioritize communication in the same way that you do when you're actively apart. And that's been another big lesson and something that we're working on to go, what does this new space look like and how does it work?
Very interesting. You're a very determined person. I can sense that. Anything that you say, I'm going to do this, you make it happen from the beginning. Share a little bit about where that determination comes from. Is it part of your personality? Is it something which you've had to put time and effort into making work for you?
I think if I asked my parents, they'd maybe say that was very much me as a child. I think probably, so maybe personality would come from that. I'd say that I hate being a talker and not delivering. So even if I can't deliver for whatever reason, I would always communicate why I can't do it or what's happened. So, when I first started my business or when I first started thinking about launching a business 20 years ago, I told people because I wanted to have the social commitment. And
accountability.
And I didn't want to be that person that was like, oh, she said she's going to start a business, but she's never done anything about it. And that social commitment is a big part. And I don't know if it's always been something there that still continues to be, but I never want to be that type of person that either lets people down or that says that I do something and never follows through. And back to, life in half a second. Life is not a dress rehearsal. We're only here for a short time. So what do we want to do and go and do it? Because the only thing that stops you half the time is you.
I recently heard a podcast. I can't remember who the podcast was with, but it was a similar concept that if you think about how much time you have left and how do you want to be remembered? Let's say it's your funeral, and what are people going to say about you on that day? How do you want to be remembered? And I thought it was such an inspirational thing. Some people say, but it's so morbid, but not really, because if you think about what do you want to leave behind that in people's memories of who you were. And if you think about that now, then you're going to work towards making sure that that happens now. Don't wait till it's too late.
Yeah, Robin Sharma has this thing where he talks about legacy, and people get very caught up about leaving a legacy in that space. But he's like, it's about what you do now. It's not about what you're going to do what people are going to, yes, what they're going to say at your funeral, but what, 10, 15, 20 years later, are people still going to remember you? Chances are they're not. Do you know what I mean? So it's about, what do you do now that have an impact on people? I think that's the most important piece, that at your funeral, they're like, this was this person, they did this, they said this, they were always this. Because 10, 15 years later, sure, they're still going to think about you, but once that one generation is gone, do we still think about what our great auntie said? No, we don't.
No,
that's the
really.
reality of it.
That's
so
true.
I think don't get caught up. I think, people get too caught up as, I want to leave a legacy and do this. And it's like, no, work on now.
Yes.
Work on how you make people feel now. Work on what makes you happy. Work on what inspires your kids. Work on what inspires you, because that will give you what you want at what people say about you at the funeral.
Great advice. Any lasting tips that you would give to my audience?
I think the piece about voice is never underestimate it, and the power that it has, the way you can persuade someone in a way to do something for better. And, it's all speaking, communication is something that's learnable. And if you're not comfortable with it, get an expert. Get you to help them with it. And that's not a plug in any way. It's just, I genuinely believe that we do not live long enough to make all the mistakes ourselves. We need to learn from other people. And if we want to be a better human being, learn from others fast.
That's such great advice. Kelly, where can we find you?
Oh, come and say hi, kellylundberg.official. That's my Instagram. LinkedIn, I use that a lot, and I love that as a platform. And my website is kellylundbergofficial.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been wonderful hearing your stories, your journey, your inspiration. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
Congratulations, you've just finished another episode of Impact Through Voice. You're well on your way to making a positive impact in the world with your voice. If you want more, head on over to lisahugo.com/podcast for show notes and all the links that we mentioned in this episode. Until next time.